We make our ecom clients about $4 million a month with Google Ads, and nearly half of that is going to be exclusive to the PPC side and search with what you're going to run within Google Ads. And the reason why is because search has such a rare ability to target people who are specifically looking for things. We call it intent-driven marketing, where it takes out the question mark, the quality of traffic. You know, if people are searching very specific things and you're targeting those people exclusively, you're getting qualified people to your website to purchase. Then it's just a matter of actually converting them and having the right assets and product quality to make sure they convert. So if you're gonna run Google Ads and you do not have a well built out strategy for the PPC side of things, you're gonna be missing out about half of the revenue that Google has to offer for your store. So we're gonna go over understanding search intent, structure of how you're gonna build things out, different settings to look out for, the bidding models you want to use and how to use them situationally, and then finally how to actually scale the campaigns. So the first thing is going to be understanding search intent. This is crucial because the premise of this is always going after the traffic that's most likely to convert first. If you do not do this and you just try to go after the broad traffic that's exciting, that has a lot of scale, you're going to burn a ton of money. The best thing you could possibly do is always go after what's most likely to convert first and then start going up from there. And I'm going to draw out what that looks like. You know, we have an internal strategy we use called the pyramid of converting traffic. We talk about here and there. And this is where it's most relevant because in the pyramid, there's going to be different levels of intent that you can go after essentially. The first is going to be what we call low-hanging fruit. And these are the terms that are most specific to people being bottom funnel, to knowing actually whether or not they're likely to actually purchase your product. What I mean by that is if you're selling, let's say, cutting boards and somebody's looking for 2 foot by 4 foot mahogany cutting board, they know exactly what they want. They specifically understand the fact of what they want and what they want to buy. Then they're just looking for the actual person to buy it from. Those are the people that you want to go after first because the challenging part's already passed, right? They're already compelled to buy. You just have to present them with a great product. So those are going to be terms related to low-hanging fruit. The higher up you go in the pyramid, the more broad the terms are going to get. So if you go, let's say, to the very top, and there's going to be a range here, these are going to be people basically not really problem aware. They understand that they want something. Maybe they're just starting to look around like, things for my kitchen, whatever they are, but they don't understand exactly what product they want to buy yet. And then it's your job at that point to compel them to buy your product and give them the reasons why and create those biases to make somebody make a purchase. But that's exactly why you do not want to go after those first, because all those different variables of getting somebody ready to buy are very tricky to do, not impossible. And that's why later you're going to go after them because there is a lot of scalability there. It's just a lot more work on the outside side. So reason being is you always want to start from the bottom up, and in between there's going to be people searching for things like best cutting board, what wood should I buy a cutting board from, different areas of intent there, and you're going to go through that sequence. But point being is if you don't start at the bottom, you're never going to be able to scale up because if you cannot convert the bottom highest intent type of traffic, you won't be able to convert the next level. Basically, the principle there is the more specific the traffic, the less scale, but easier to convert. The broader the traffic, the more scale, harder to convert. And there's obviously levels in between. So make sure to always start at the bottom and go to the top and maximize the use for your money. The next most important thing is going to be the actual structure of how you're building campaigns in the account. Now, this is so important because Google does not do a good job of dictating where budgets should go. For example, Facebook, if you ran that, you understand if you give it if you're using a budget at the campaign level, using CBO, it'll do a really good job of catering that budget towards where it should be spent, where it's going to make you the most money. Google does not do that. If you have, let's say, ad groups, which is where the targeting is created, and you have multiple of them, even if you have an ad group that does really well, Google will just keep spreading the money evenly because it wants to spend on targeting. And the biggest thing you want to avoid is letting Google have control of your money. We talk about all the time why you want to generally have Google a bit more on a leash and make sure that there's structure there. So if something does work, you can dictate where that money goes. But when it comes to campaigns, you're going to have the campaign level. And then under that, you're going to have the ad group level. We'll just say AG for ad group. And the reason why you have to segment at the campaign level is because at the campaign level, one really important thing is controlled there, which is going to be budget. You don't have the ability in Google to dictate certain ad groups having certain budgets. For example, like Facebook, you can. On Google Ads, the budget is exclusively controlled at the campaign level. So when you want to force split things and make sure areas of targeting get specific budget levels, they have to be in totally different campaigns. And a lot of the times we do this excessively because we don't want, let's say, 10 different ad groups with an ad group per category of products in your store, and then just letting Google kind of determine where things go. Really, you're splitting up campaigns by different areas of what you're trying to target. That could be product categories, that could be intent types, that could be forcing scale. Anytime you feel that something should have its own exclusive budget because it's more likely to convert than something else, you want to make sure that it's segmented campaign-wise, because then you can force it to do that. Like I said, if you put everything together, it's just going to be a big mess, and Google's going to spend a ton of money on whatever targeting is easiest to spend it on, and not actually spend the money on what should be spending based off of the logic of conversion. Once you have the campaigns built, there's going to be a couple areas you want to watch out for, which is mainly going to be in the settings of those campaigns. So we're going to talk about those a little bit because there are a lot of different settings that can completely skew how a campaign runs. And there's a lot of things that Google generally makes sound very cool, that makes it sound like it's going to work, it's going to make your campaign do better if it includes that, and it's going to completely destroy the campaign. One of those is going to be called optimized targeting. Now, optimized targeting is one of the worst settings that Google ever created. And basically what it is on Google's side is them saying, if we find targeting that works, we're going to be able to expand that targeting and scale at a higher level. But in reality, what happens is it basically lets Google expand past what you're trying to target. And like we talked about, Google is so important, such a great platform because you can fixate on targeting. So when it comes to the reality of how Google works, you do not want to give it control to start scaling broadly. Basically, what you want to do is get to the level of scale that works within that targeting and then move on. We'll talk about scaling later in this video, but the biggest thing is you want to stay away from this because what'll happen is it'll not target the actual terms you want to go after, and it'll just start expanding into all this crazy traffic, grind through your money, and you're not going to have any actual profitability there. So make sure to stay away from optimized targeting. Next is going to be location targeting. There's two settings that are kind of hidden. There's going to be a drop down whenever you're setting up the location targeting for the campaign. And that's going to be presence in or interest in. And the difference here is very similar to optimized targeting. If you have the setting that's based off of the presence where somebody is actually located, it's going to be people who actually live in those areas, not people searching for those areas. If you have people that are interested in those areas, that's where things get a little muddy, because what will happen is you might try to target, let's say California, or maybe you're targeting a whole country as your location targeting. If people are somewhere else, maybe you're targeting California and people are in Florida, and they're looking at California because they want a vacation there, it's going to start showing them your ad because they're interested in that state. So very important. If you're ever doing location specific targeting, even if it's specific to an actual country, make sure it's the presence of them being there, because that's going to get people who are actually living in the States, not traveling, not on vacation. You're not going to waste a ton of budget on people who are just interested because of their cookies and Google determining whether or not they want to show them the ad. So very important to have that one in there. Next is going to be all broad targeting. Now there's going to be a checkbox somewhere in the campaign build that's basically saying you want to exclusively use broad keywords. And that's not necessarily bad if you're intending to do that. But the problem is if you have that setting on and you're going after phrase match targeting, you're not going to be able to use phrase match. And there's going to be a lot of situations where you want to use phrase match targeting. There's also going to be situations where you want to use broad match targeting, but you got to make sure that you have the control to do both of those. And if you have that setting on, it's going to exclusively make you use broad match targeting. Now, a couple honorable mentions is going to be actual demographic targeting on PPC search. With PPC, a lot of the times you don't need to do demographic targeting, because if somebody's searching a keyword, it's based off the intent of them being in the market for that product. So it does not really matter whether they're a girl, they're a boy. You know, if it's a girl-based product, maybe it's a guy trying to buy it as a gift, whatever it is, if they're searching those terms, they should be in the market of buying it. Now, sometimes there's, unique situations where like you really know only women buy from your store. That's going to be a situation where you might want to turn those off, right? But if you're just trying to make deductions based off of the average demographic of who's buying your products, I would stay away from doing that and just focus on the intent behind the keywords you're targeting and let the algorithm do a little bit of the work on the demographic side. There are areas like wealth demographics you can go after. Once again, very situational. This is only going to be if you're selling like very high ticket stuff that people might be looking at because they're interested and they think it's cool, but they might not be able to afford it. So in that case, maybe you're going to use the top 10% of wealth demographic in the area. Google changed a little bit over the years. You used to actually be able to target salaries, which was really cool, like salary ranges. They took that a while, they took that away a long time ago with the data consumption and all the different protection rules that got put in place, but you can at least target percentages of wealth demographics. So if you want to go after an area and basically target the top 10% of wealth in that area, that'll kind of do the job. It's not as good as back in the day, but it's definitely pretty handy situationally. Second to last is going to be the different type of bidding models you're going to use. Now, this is super important because each of the bidding models alter completely how the campaigns operate. There's going to be very situational moves that you're going to want to make with both of them. And there's other options as well. We'll talk about why we don't really mess around with those, especially nowadays. But the two most popular bidding models you're gonna use is gonna be max conversion value and then ROAS. Now, ROAS is essentially just target ROAS, target ROI, basically telling Google what ROI you're aiming for the actual campaign. Now, that does not work exactly as it should. I'm gonna explain really what that means, but the first is very simple. It's basically telling the campaign you wanna go after people who are gonna yield you the maximum amount of conversion value, bang for your buck really. And this is a little bit broader of a bidding model. This is giving Google a little bit more leeway because it's not saying specifically how much you wanna make, but it is saying you wanna go after people who are most likely to convert and yield you revenue for the store. So very, very important. There are different bidding models, like I said, like manual CPC, things like that. Way back in the day, we used to use this back when the algorithm wasn't as strong, but over the last 2 to 3 years, Google's algorithm has gotten way, way better when it comes to the campaign algorithm side of things. So now that you can actually leverage these and they work, and you don't have to feed the actual campaign data before switching it from manual CPC to max conversion value, it's very, very strong. So we start almost every campaign off with maximized conversion value, unless it's a specific scenario, which I'll talk a little bit about. But the key here on the front end is gonna get more of an expedited scale. And then once you get that scale and you see some kind of plateau, then you're gonna start to try to optimize with a secondary strategy like ROAS. But let's talk a little bit about when to use ROAS. Now, like I said, ROAS is very specific to telling the campaign how much you wanna make in return for what you're targeting. And a lot of the times that might be a minimum of 200%, which is gonna be like a 2x ROI, could be 2.5, 250%. But the key to this is really knowing that this limits scale. So really the only time you wanna use this as a strategy is if you're trying to optimize a campaign down that's scaled out really high, but it doesn't have as good of profitability as you want, or you're starting out with a really broad type of traffic and you want to be very specific to the people that you're trying to target. So you might use this, for example, if you're going after really broad keywords. We talked about the triangle at the beginning of this video. If you're going after the higher levels where it's broader and broader, that's somewhere where you're going to want to start, because there is going to be a lot of traffic you can scale into, but a lot of the time that's not going to be what converts. So that's where you're going to kind of tighten the net a little bit, use something like ROAS. But if you're targeting lower funnel traffic, higher intent traffic, and you want to get as much of it as possible, that's where you're going to want to use maximized conversion value first, and then switch over to ROAS. Now the last part, which is going to be the most exciting, is going to be scaling, how to scale, when to slow down scale for different campaign types, and then how it really works as far as a pattern on Google. Now, scaling on Google versus Facebook is very different. With Facebook, a lot of the times, you're gonna have more vertical scaling. You're gonna have basically a campaign that has killer creatives in it, and it's just gonna scale to the moon. At some point, it'll plateau, but you're gonna get a lot of scale out of those main campaigns. Maybe you're just continuously feeding creatives into that campaign. With Google, it doesn't really work like that, because when it comes to PPC, the amount of people searching things is very finite. And by finite, I mean it's gonna cap at some point a lot faster than, for example, targeting on Facebook, which is gonna be demographic based. So when it comes to Google, you're gonna be more so scaling what we call horizontally. You're gonna be maximizing the amount of scale that you can find for the targeting you're going after. And then you're gonna go to the next one and the next one. And you're gonna let those past campaigns continue to do what they're doing. One of the best parts about Google Ads is rarely ever you're gonna have an inconsistency or like big crashes. Most of the time, unless there's like a crazy black swan event or something happening in the outside world, search is gonna be super, super consistent. If you build something up and get something working, it's almost always gonna maintain at that level unless something crazy happens or something changes in the platform. Strategies do change over time. Like for example, nowadays you're gonna use broad a lot of the times with something like maximize conversion. 2 years ago, you wouldn't touch broad because the traffic quality was so bad. So there will be shifts over time. But aside from all these different variables, a lot of the times you're gonna basically find how to scale a certain type of targeting, leave it at where it is, let it do its thing, of course, monitor it, move budget around based off of profitability, but then you're gonna focus on new testing. So the scale and the amount of increased revenue coming from the account isn't gonna be more about getting that out of one campaign type. It's gonna be finding new verticals to scale into and then constantly stacking them up. Almost like, the pattern's almost like a staircase, right? Where you're going up and up and up, and you're taking those pauses to reach that plateau per each section, and then you're adding to it. So very, very important to understand, do not force scale if the profitability is not there. Google is infamous for wanting to spend your money, and it will spend your money a lot of times, especially on the other campaign types like PMAX shopping. But one of the things that you have to understand is ROI and scale are on like two opposite sides of the teeter-totter. If ROI isn't high enough for scale to increase and you increase scale, it's just gonna drop ROI because it will spend your money. It just won't do it on profitable traffic. So very important. You're gonna see the plateau happen once you've increased budget enough. to where you're hitting kind of your minimum ROI that you want to hit for scalability. And we talk about that. There's usually going to be 2 levels. There's going to be where you want to have a cutoff for a test just not working, like a break-even ROI, and then the ROI that's going to be for scalability. A lot of the times that might be something like 2x, for break-even, and then 3x for scalability. So you'll feel it out for your own brand. You probably have those numbers on the Facebook side, but very important to know, if the ROI is not there, the scale is not going to be there. That's where you really want to move on. So one thing that's really cool though is PPC campaigns are safer to scale than algorithm-based campaigns. So like PMAX, we talk about usually giving 3 days on average increases based off of scale. So you can let the algorithm kind of revitalize based off of that new level, find stability, and then do the next bump up increase. Because Google PPC is based off of search intent, you can scale a lot quicker because you're not really having questionable traffic that's coming into play. Usually you're just trying to maximize the amount of traffic based off of what's converting. We'll talk about impression share and target impression share and how you would kind of gauge where you're at with profitability and scaling. But point being is you can do bigger increases on the PPC side. Instead of, let's say, 20 to 40% increases, you can do anything from up to, let's say, 60 to 70% increase. All of it depends on the ROI for the campaign, right? But point being is you can scale them a little bit quicker than algorithm-based campaigns. I mentioned impression share. Now, impression share is relative. You might have a vertical of targeting you go after where you have, let's say, 30% of impression share, which in your head, you might think you have another 70% to scale into. But there's a caveat there. When you're using something like maximize conversion value or ROAS, what's happening is not all impression is built equally, right? Basically, if you have 1,000 people searching a term, even though they're searching the exact same term, there's going to be a percent of those people who are likely to convert based off of their past patterns, which Google has. It's never going to let you see, but it knows exactly who's likely to actually make a purchase. So you might actually only want to scale into, let's say, 40% of an audience instead of 100%, because 40% of that audience is likely to actually convert. Even though there's more terms you can scale into, you're really basing that off of the scale of what's being spent, what's being forced back into return from the ROI. So that's why I always say, make sure to scale based off of ROI and numbers coming back into the campaign, not just off of what you think you should be able to scale it to, because there is going to be an amount of traffic that you just do not want to touch the campaigns. Last thing is going to be SCAGs. Now, SCAGs is a classic term in the PPC world. It means single keyword ad groups. The beauty of SCAGs is basically if you find keywords that are absolutely killing it and they're in a grouping of keywords in another ad group across your account, what you're gonna really wanna do is pull that keyword out, put it in its own campaign with its own ad group and own ads dedicated to the relevancy of that keyword, and force budget on it until you scale and maximize that scale. Because what's gonna happen is it takes out the ability for Google to move budget around and start putting budget onto other keywords. It's gonna force the budget only onto those keywords. So this is a later game strategy. Basically, once you start getting really good data that shows certain keywords are doing really, really well for your store and you wanna get more of that traffic, you can basically pull those out of those campaigns, put them into new campaigns, make sure they're completely isolated, and then they have their own dedicated budget. So there's a lot of small things like that you can do down the line that you wouldn't do immediately once you get the data. But the key there is, of course, making sure to do it safely and understanding that certain big moves will trip up how the campaigns work. And you always, like we talked about in some other videos, always want to transition budget over. You don't want to, for example, just make all these crazy changes, turn things off, and then turn them off somewhere on. You want to basically run them at the same time, have the old campaigns running with the old budget, take a little budget off, put that budget you took off on the new campaigns, and then based off of what's working better, then you start shifting things over. Sometimes you will run new campaigns that don't do as well. Then you just pull the budget back off those, put them on the old campaigns. If they do well though, you're basically gonna take the budget and keep shifting it over until you have all the budget you need on that campaign, and that campaign is gonna absolutely kill it. So like I said, do it safely. Make sure to always increase the odds of something working. But everything that I've talked about in this video is crucial to having a successful PPC strategy. If you do have any questions specifically about something I didn't touch on in this video with PPC, make sure to drop it in the comment section below. I'll answer it personally. I appreciate you watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. We always appreciate that. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.